We're now 61 days away from the election, and Portland has been a big talking point in the presidential race. But as they say, all politics is local, so let's dive into what's really on the ballot here. Also, speaking of the presidency, how exactly does the Electoral College work again, and why do we have it in the first place? And getting unemployment has been a huge headache for a lot of Oregonians. Now, a family is locked out of their bank accounts because of a fraud they had nothing to do with.
I feel as though Chase is treating us like criminals, and we are not criminals. We are upstanding people that want to live a normal life.
Here's the story.
All right, thanks for being with us. I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. We check emails and tweets throughout the show. Let me know what's on your mind. We read comments at the end of the show, as you probably know. And as you'll see, we answer viewer questions every single night. So email us at thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, or use Twitter in the hashtag #HeyDan. All right, let's get started. Okay, our big story tonight, not protests, no, not the pandemic. We're going to be talking about the other P word, politics. That's right, it is election season. And you might have noticed, since Portland is in the national spotlight right now, that everything happening here has become a talking point by either President Trump or Joe Biden on the campaign trail. Now, if you watch nightly news before us, then you probably already know that. So I want to talk about some races and issues that Lester's team did not. I'm talking about the ones that directly impact Oregonians. So here's a look at what we're going to be focusing on through the next weeks and months as we get closer to Election Day. Now, we got some really big races across the state. Senator Jeff Merkley is up for re-election, and while he's got a pretty good chance of winning, his Republican challenger Joe Ray Perkins has made some headlines for supporting the conspiracy theory QAnon. We've got races also in all 5 congressional districts, including an open seat in District 2 after Oregon's only Republican in Congress, Greg Walden, decided to retire. And of course, here in Portland, we got the mayoral race. Mayor Ted Wheeler has faced a lot of pressure, even calls to resign during these protests. He's being challenged by a more progressive candidate, Sarah Iannarone, who I'm actually going to be talking to tomorrow. So we're going to have that interview for you then. Now, Oregon has 4 measures you should know about on the statewide ballot. Measure 107 would put limits on campaign contributions. That's something Oregon doesn't do right now. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Measure 108 increases tobacco taxes, and that also applies to e-cigarettes and vaping. Measure 109 would legally allow people to use psilocybin. Those are magic mushrooms, but only in a licensed therapeutic setting. And Measure 110 would decriminalize small amounts of drug possession, and it would direct people to addiction treatment. Look, I get it. I just threw a ton at you right now. So we're going to focus on just one thing tonight, the campaign contribution limits. See, right now, people or corporations can give however much money they want to a political campaign. So, for example, in 2018, Nike founder Phil Knight gave $2.5 million to Newt Bueller, Governor Kate Brown's challenger at the time. But a lot of people think when they hear something like that just because you have boatloads of money doesn't mean that you should have more influence than other people when it comes to politics. So they want to even the playing field. Measure 107 would amend the state constitution to do this: allow laws limiting political campaign contributions and expenditures, requiring disclosure of political campaign contributions and expenditures, and requiring political campaign advertisements to identify who paid for them. I talked to KGW political analyst Len Bergstein about all of this.
To the average voter, I think that this type of legislation always seems common sense, to put limits on how much people can bring in, kind of level the playing field so that we're not being swayed by dollars from donors, but the content of the person running for office. Why are these typically so difficult to pass?
Yeah, well, great question, and it really goes to the history of the way Oregon and voters have looked at the First Amendment. I mean, most people think that, at least up until now, that the question that using political contributions was akin to or equal to free speech. And so with Oregon having very strong kind of protections for free speech, measures in the past that have tried to limit contributions, either expenditures or contributions, have fallen afoul of the free speech protections. The legislature said, well, if we've got to deal with this through a constitutional amendment, let's do it through a constitutional amendment. And that's what 107 is. It's really kind of empowering the legislature and local governments to pass laws on contribution limits and expenditure limits rather than actually imposing a specific limit in this measure. So if a voter wants to say, I'd like to move towards allowing this and not running afoul of the First Amendment, then they would vote yes. If they're still concerned about the fact that any kind of rules that limit expenditures or contribution limits run afoul of the First Amendment, then they would vote no.
So, how did we get here? How did Oregon become one of just 5 states with no limit on how much you can donate to a political campaign? Well, as Len mentioned, it's kind of a free speech issue. Back in 1995, voters passed a measure capping donations, but the state Supreme Court decided that it violated the part of the Oregon Constitution that says no law shall be passed restraining the free expression of opinion or restricting the right to speak, write, or print freely on any subject whatever. So then, in 2006, voters tried to amend the Constitution to allow donation limits, but it didn't pass. In 2016, you'll probably remember this, Multnomah County voters passed their own version of campaign finance law, capping donations for candidates just in the county. That was actually challenged in court, and earlier this year, the state Supreme Court ruled that those limits were, quote, not facially invalid, meaning technically not automatically unconstitutional. But state officials still determined that the ruling did not mean those limits would be put in place after all. So here we are. Now voters have yet another chance to pass campaign finance reform. Okay, let's take a minute now. Let's take a breath, all right? That was a lot, but I'd like to talk about the presidential election because the past 90 days of protests and riots and tear gas have created a series of national narratives that could play a part in how swing states vote for president. And something tells me that the question in this next email will be relevant again sometime very soon. Jen sent me this. Hi, Dan. Jen, it's Hey Dan, by the way, not to nitpick. Here's a segment idea, the Electoral College Explained. With all of the conversation currently happening around the election, I'm going to guess that many people don't fully understand the Electoral College, how it works. Give your viewers a summarized tutorial about the Electoral College. That is a great suggestion. I think there's a lot of value in that, so we put something together.
To understand how the Electoral College works, we first need to go back to when the system was created, during the Constitutional Convention of 1787, and the compromise they made for how to elect a president. Some were worried about the public choosing a leader, believing everyday citizens were uninformed about political issues. Others wanted to make sure Congress didn't pick the president either, to keep those branches of government separate. So they came up with a system of electors appointed by each state, independent from both people and politicians who cast their votes instead. Each state's share of electors is determined by its number of seats in the House and Senate, and since states' House seats are based off population, so are the electoral votes it gets. That's where slavery played a role when the system was developed. See, the South had a larger population than the North, but a smaller share of voters because slaves couldn't vote. But the South wanted more political power, so they came up with the 3/5 compromise. Slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person in population counts, which gave Southern states more electoral votes. Fast forward now to today, where we still use the Electoral College, of course, to pick a president. There are 538 electors across the country. A candidate has to get at least 270 of them to win the presidency. So why does our vote matter if electors are the ones picking the president? Well, most states, except for Nebraska and Maine, have laws requiring that all of their electors vote for the candidate who wins the state's popular vote. That means even if a candidate wins a state by just 51%, all that state's electoral votes will go toward that candidate. This kind of winner-take-all method means that the national popular vote can be different from the Electoral College vote, which has happened 5 times through history. Notably in 2016, when Hillary Clinton won almost 3 million more votes than Donald Trump nationally, but lost the Electoral College. And in 2000, when Al Gore won the popular vote, but lost the presidency to George W. Bush. Recently, 15 states and the District of Columbia joined the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. They're pledging to give their electoral votes to the candidate who wins the national popular vote, rather than the person who wins the popular vote in their state. But this won't take effect until enough states adopt it, which so far hasn't happened.
Now, if you've watched the story over the last few months, you know that we don't always have kind words to say about the Oregon Employment Department. And to be fair, they have struggled to help thousands of Oregonians thanks to their ancient computer system and a lot of other problems. But that is not this story. The woman in this story has nothing but praise, actually, for the Oregon Employment Department. Her problem is with Chase Bank. Our Kristen Severance found out that Chase locked this woman out of her account because of the checks from unemployment, and she's not alone.
Dan, I learned what happened to Karen Crater has happened to others. It's all related to this massive unemployment fraud where imposters are stealing people's benefits. But some people like Karen, who are legitimately receiving unemployment, are getting stuck in the middle and locked out of their bank accounts. How are you doing?
Very frustrated. My entire family is super frustrated with not being able to get access to funds.
Karen Crater had been getting her unemployment check directly deposited into her Chase account since she was laid off from her office job in February. She had no issues until her daughter tried to buy food at the grocery store last week, and her card tied to Karen's account was declined.
And they said, your parents' account, you need to have your parents call in. There's something going on. So as soon as I was done with her on the phone, I immediately called in to Chase. They said, you just need to bring your ID into a branch and they'll clear everything up. They need to verify your ID. And so
Karen took her ID to the Chase on Lombard Street in Portland. The branch manager said there was a fraud alert on the account and they had to call the bank's 1-800 number to get it straightened out.
So we sat in the office with him and he called and we were on hold for 50 minutes. And then the call got disconnected. So we redialed back in, then we were on hold for 45 minutes and they hung up again. Then we called the third time for 40 minutes and then the call was garbled.
After a fourth call, Chase Bank said they needed proof that Karen was eligible to receive unemployment benefits. She printed off something from the OED website, brought it back to the branch, but they said it had to be printed off on the Oregon Employment Department letterhead. So she called OED and reached an employee named John.
And he literally, he was awesome. It's frustrating. And he really did the best he could do. He went to his manager and they put the document information on a letterhead and they contacted Chase directly and spoke to the branch manager and sent the documents to them.
But days later, Karen was still locked out.
And I feel like that this is really very disrespectful on their part.
The unemployment claims for nearly 200,000 Washington workers had been flagged over the summer after a massive unemployment imposter scheme. Several Chase customers reported being locked out of their accounts. Both Chase and the state of Washington said they were investigating. But Karen said her situation is proof this is still happening and happening in Oregon.
They have restricted all of our accounts. None of us can get access to our funds. And I feel as though Chase is treating us like criminals, and we are not criminals. We are upstanding people that want to live a normal life and, didn't ask for any of this.
I do have some good news to share. This is why I love doing these kinds of stories. So Karen said after we contacted Chase, they called her, apologized, and unlocked her accounts. She is definitely relieved to have access to her money, but she's worried that this will still happen to other families. Has this happened to you? Are you having similar issues? Let us know. Just use the hashtag #HeyDan.
Kristen, thank you. And Chase sent us a statement that says, in part, as reported, the government is investigating potential fraud relating to unemployment insurance benefits. To protect us, our customers, or to meet legal requirements, we have restricted some accounts pending further review. So, after 3 months of protests in Portland, how does what we're experiencing here compare to other protest movements in history? We've got some answers from an expert. And it turns out we actually went back inside Woodlawn way back in 1998. We got something pretty great to show you from the KGW vault when the story continues. Hey, all right, welcome back. I'm betting you probably have your phone in your hand. If you do, hop online, get on social media, let me know what you're thinking. Use that hashtag #HeyDan on Twitter. Send me an Instagram message if you want. You can find us at The Story KGW. However you want to get a hold of me, tons of different ways. Now, you might have noticed during the show here that we haven't really talked about the protests yet. And that's because it was actually pretty quiet last night. 2 small groups gathered in different parts of Portland, but we didn't see any violence or clashes with police like we see on some of the bad nights. But look, we'll see what happens tonight. There is no question, though, that what's happened so far this summer is definitely historic. I talked with Portland State history professor Mark Rodriguez about that.
As you take a look at what Portland is experiencing and has experienced over the past 3 months, how do you frame that in the discussion of history and how we have seen protests evolve over time, and whether it be here, other parts of the country or world?
Yeah, I think for me, in thinking about social movements in Portland and also the United States, it seemed to me that many months ago, these movements had very clear goals. They had very clear demands, and that over time we saw that that has changed somewhat, where the demands have sort of been blurred in a lot of places, and where we spoke about police reform maybe 6 months ago, we speak about some things that are realistic and some things that are probably not realistic at all. And then I look back at other movements, and what you can see is that those movements that maintained a focus on specific goals, the process of negotiating with political leaders, police departments, things like that, those tended to be successful over time. And that where we see movements in 1967 or 68 or even right now that lose track of a focus for specific demands, it's very hard for, say, the city of Portland to respond to demands that are either unrealistic or not particularly clear. And I think that's something we've seen. And historically, many social movements suffer from that sort of breakdown over time. So, for example, Martin Luther King in the late 50s had a very organized, focused movement with clear demands. And then into the early 1960s, it began to break down. Now, that isn't necessarily always a bad thing because the movement changed and it developed new demands and a new focus over time. But here, I think we're in this period where it's unclear what the specific things that can be done, say, for example, in the city of Portland, are. We don't really know. And I think political leaders and others are sort of clutching at straws to try to figure that out right now.
Now, listen, I talk to people every night, experts, whether they have to do with history or policing. If you have questions about these protests, about the riots, about things that you're seeing, police response, of course we do too, but I want to hear your questions. So keep reaching out using that hashtag #HeyDan or emailing us at thestory@kgw.com, and we will get your questions answered. Today was the first day of school for a lot of kids around here. Probably going to be the strangest school year of our lives. I mean, for the first time, going back to school doesn't actually mean that you're going back to a school or maybe going anywhere. You might be just doing it right there in your living room or kitchen. I do hope that you checked your internet speed, though. My nephew in Pennsylvania went to a pod on Monday with a small group of classmates to do some distance learning at a home there, and the internet crashed for like 2 hours because it's set up for a small family, not 8 kids on laptops streaming lectures from the kitchen. Here in Oregon, every district has a plan that could put you in that type of bind because nearly all of them requires the internet. We got a huge list on kgw.com if you want to take a look. But Vancouver, they started school yesterday. Portland starts today. Beaverton next week. Salem Kaiser also same next week. All of them are going to do online distance learning. And that's true for almost everyone in the state, to be honest, unless you're one of the 8,000 people living in Lake County, where as of yesterday, coronavirus cases are at 0, so their kids will truly be heading back to school. Enjoy it. For everyone else, most schools do eventually have plans in place to where hopefully our kids will be doing some in-person learning before the end of the year. We'll have to wait and see, of course. But I shared an old school picture of myself on my Facebook page. That's me looking like a brunette child He-Man. And people started sharing their old school pictures from back in the day too, and they were great. So let's take a look at a few of them. Here's Todd Amell. He called this his Brady Bunch perm, which is awesome since take a look at him now. This is his profile picture. You notice no curls. Amazing. That was a perm. It looked good. You should bring it back. And Jennifer Tapp with the Dorothy Hamill haircut, as she described it. I give it a 10 out of 10. And here is Michelle Pat, who apparently went to the same exact barber that I did. Thank you so much. These gave me a smile. I love seeing these today. Please, anybody who wants to send in your school pictures, I'd love to see them. So use your phone right now. Get on my Facebook page. Share some old school pictures with us. And a word of advice, the more awkward, the better. Now, speaking of back to school, you may be familiar with our series on Woodlawn Elementary School. Kristen Severance and photojournalist Jean Cotton spent the entire 2019-2020 school year telling stories about the life that these people are leading in there, inside and outside of the school. And they're going to continue telling those stories over the next school year as well. Now, we received this email after our latest 30-minute special that aired Friday. It says, and it's kind of long, but bear with me because I think it's really cute. It's great. Kristen and Dan, my wife Jan and I have been enthralled enthralled by and appreciative of your Woodlawn series all year. It has been thoughtful, informative, and respectful of students, teachers, and the Woodlawn community. Really great journalism. I'm writing you because my wife Jan isn't one to toot her own horn, but she was one of the remarkable educators there at the time. Principal Linda Harris provided the leadership. I got to witness all of this as Jan's husband, and as a teacher myself, I'm still so impressed by what those Woodlawn teachers and staff members and students accomplished during that decade. So I think there are even more stories you could tell about the history of that important neighborhood school. Thanks for the series, and here's hoping you can do even more journalistic digging into a time when Woodlawn was seen as a model for turning around urban schools of poverty. Regards, Tim Gillespie. So Tim, thank you so much for the email, and we went looking for you down into the KGW vault, and we found several stories from the 90s talking about Woodlawn's success. Here's one when Principal Linda Harris moved on to a role with the district.
Fifth grade graduation at Woodlawn Elementary is always a sentimental affair, but this year the applause was louder. The tears came faster and the hugs were closer. This year they were saying goodbye to Principal Linda Harris.
The thing I like most about you is...
In addition to inspiring tributes, Harris is credited with turning around one of the city's worst schools.
I'm most proud of the fact that children are achieving.
The latest test scores show that students at Woodlawn met the new state standards in math at every grade level. Reading scores are also on the way up.
I think that you have to have high expectations for children. You have to have high expectations for staff.
A philosophy the district wants Harris to share at other struggling schools. So after 10 years, she is packing her office at Woodlawn to join a new academic intervention team.
These days, these are curriculum materials.
She will share her success at creating an effective teaching team, keeping kids focused on learning and getting parents involved.
But hopefully I'll be able to help just as many children as I did when I was here.
But that doesn't make leaving any easier.
This is nice.
Now it's time for me to say goodbye and go on because I can't be with her for the rest of my life. And it just hurt, it just hurt me real bad.
It's just great to have a good principal like Miss Harris. She's just fabulous. I can't put it in words.
Except maybe to say thank you.
You might have recognized, well, that's Kristen right there, but the reporter who was doing that story you just watched was Tracy Berry. So it was really nice to get that look, and thank you for the email to get us to go down there and check out the vault. You should check out Kristen's 30-minute special, Inside Woodlawn, No Time to Waste. It's an honest conversation with these Woodlawn teachers about what's happening in Portland right now. You can watch that and the rest of our series, Inside Woodlawn, on the KGW YouTube page. All right, get out your phone. Last chance to send some comments. We're going to read a few after the break and finish up the story. We'll see you after this. Hey, got a couple of comments here. One on Twitter. How can we show the rest of America that the protests, riots aren't actually destroying most of Portland's streets and businesses? I kind of think my answer pairs up with this next one from Jan, and said that report on the Electoral College went too fast for me to grasp. I'd love another report at a slower version. Well, we put the whole thing on YouTube. So everything that we do here on air, the entire show, and then sometimes individual segments will be posted to the KGW YouTube channel or onto my Facebook page. So you can get on there, take another look if you want something to be explained a little bit, if you want to take another look at what we've done, or if you want to share it. Maybe you have family members in other parts of the country that want to see kind of what the coverage looks like from the people in Portland, not from the national news covering Portland. Just the thing, if you want to pop on and check that out. And then lastly, we have another call, this one from Karen Moore about our music. Please change the music, please. No. Thanks for being with us. See you tomorrow.